Welcome back to another edition of Between Two FARS. Once again, I'm Warnke Miller here with the amazing Bob Tepfer, and we're continuing our discussion of contract inspection and acceptance. We've talked about clauses that you need to use, the importance of understanding who has authority in this. And then in the last episode, we talked about overzealous inspection or lackadaisical inspection, the importance of adhering to your contract standards. Today, we're going to explore what I like to think of as the trifecta of contract inspection. You need to always be conscientious of the method of inspection, the place of inspection, and the timing of your inspection. And we got Bob here to sort of walk us through the importance of each of these things, not only during the administration of your contract, but also during the formation of your contract. You really have to be thinking about what types of terms you want to put into your contract and the pros and cons of each. So Bob, let's first talk about method of inspection. What sort of things do you need to be thinking about in terms of your method of inspection?
Well, again, I can't emphasize enough that you bring the inspector in at the creation. If you can get the particular organization to sit down with the people that are going to be involved. And the method of inspection is normally not spelled out. It's just that a reasonable inspection, which will determine whether or not there's been adherence to their contractual obligation, that it is the standard that we agreed to, which is spelled out. Normally, we don't speak to contractually what the obligation is and how we will inspect. But what the government has to be very concerned with, and the inspector should be aware of, is that you don't over-inspect to the point that you interfere or delay performance. And they need to make certain that that method of inspection is determining whether or not there is adherence to that standard.
How does industry standards come into play with something like this? What does that mean?
Well, if sometimes, if the standard is spelled out, you've better make certain that it does adhere to industry standards. Because if the standard is spelled out as to what we're buying and the inspector looks to industry standards and they're not completely consistent, perhaps the industry standard is higher, they're going to be a change and it's going to be a claim. Hopefully, we normally buy at least the industry standard in things, so we need to speak to that. Sometimes folks think that that's enough, that they can point to it being the industry standard, and that's, doesn't matter what the contract says. That's why it's good to have the inspector involved in developing and spelling those standards out in the contract. They can even say, consistent with industry standards, we shall do this, this, and this, so that there's no misunderstanding. And once again, contractor is going to give you only the standard that you speak to, because it costs them money to go to a higher standard potentially. And, yes. And inspectors who aren't looking at it from the business perspective think, they're not ethical if they don't do that, but they might not get the award if they do that. So that's where you get them involved early and you say what you want, because that's probably what you're going to get.
Well, how about the place of inspection? What sort of considerations do we need to think through when determining where we're going to inspect?
Okay, the FOB with regard to supplies, the FOB point is critical, because think about it. If you're buying instruments or something that is at risk in shipment, you don't want to buy FOB origin. Why? Because there's going to be a lot of finger pointing if you're going to go for one of the exceptions, the latent defect, fraud, or gross mistake, which I'll go into later. If you get it and it doesn't seem to work properly, the carrier might have damaged it, but guess what? You took title back at origin. That's why I would really press that you consider getting FOB destination, because unless and until you get it, it's not yours. And
so your two main choices are FOB, which stands for free on board, right? We've got free on board origin and free on board destination. Those are you can come up with other unique places for inspection, but those are your basics. Either where the contractor has manufactured and finished the creation of the product, that would be origin, right? FOB origin. FOB destination would more likely be NASA Johnson Space Center, our loading dock, our laboratory, wherever it is we would like to utilize the product that we're buying. Is that a fair summary of the two differences? Okay.
Yeah, it'll spell it out, but the risk in transportation belongs to the contractor because title has not passed. And there's always, some folks might say, well, it's a risk we might take, but the reality is the confusion associated with whatever the defect is. Was it there at the beginning? Did the carrier cause the problem? Or, if it was there at the beginning, we overlooked it, we may have a waiver issue. If the carrier did it, that can be a real headache because the carrier will obviously say that it occurred back in manufacturing. It's not their problem. So it's much clearer to get it at destination and the title hasn't passed and it still belongs to the contractor. And the contractor would have paid the carrier and let them settle it because the carrier is a third party. We don't know who they are legally and we don't care. Only thing is we're not going to accept it because it's defective. I think you get the theme. Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the timing of your inspections. What sort of considerations do we need to think about in terms of when you inspect?
Well, I mean, there's various kinds of inspection. Sometimes you got to get involved in detail in the manufacturing process, but that's going to be it's unusual, but it does occur. And the when make certain that at the end that you are doing the inspection because nobody really cares if it was going really well. And then ultimately, for whatever reason, it turned out to be defective. Some processes require that you be involved, early on. But the frequency, the method, you can pretty much use anything reasonable that you want. You just have to make certain that you don't interfere with performance.
Now, what happens if we've got a delivery date, but we're ahead of schedule and the contractor has ostensibly completed their work and they're ready to deliver ahead of the delivery date? So you've got it landing on your dock 2 weeks before the actual contractual delivery date. How do we handle inspection then?
Well, we can do a regular routine inspection if we want and take title in possession of it. The only difference is if we inspect and it's a minor defect and the contractor at a reasonable basis for thinking it adhered to all the contractual requirements, they have a reasonable opportunity to cure. We have to provide them that under the law. It's clearly different than if they deliver on the due date and it does not adhere to the contractual requirements. Then we have a right to default terminate immediately, which we don't have early on. And then we can effectively default them if it shows up. We're entitled to almost a perfect tender, I would say. There are exceptions with regard to substantial compliance, actually in construction and in supply contracts to some extent. And it's all based upon the concept of equity abhors of forfeiture. And as the language says that you've outlined there, the contracting officer ordinarily must give the contractor an opportunity to correct or replace non-conforming goods or services. And this would be the case if it's an early delivery, not the case if it's on the due date.
Right, because it has to be able to be accomplished within the required delivery schedule. Right. So what happens if we've got a contractor who delivers stuff to the dock and it's 2 weeks early and we look at it and it is not up to par and we let them know and they say, we think it's fine, we've already delivered it, we're not doing anything.
Okay, so we're not doing it. I would construe that as an unequivocal statement that they're not going to perform. Obviously, you have to prove that they're not going to adhere to an otherwise obligation under the contract, but that's an anticipatory repudiation of the contract, and you can default terminate immediately. Most contractors will not do that because they know that a declaration like that, if they say that we're going to look at it, we believe, from our, perspective that it looks like it's adhering to the obligation. That's a lot different than saying we're not doing it. We don't have to do that. We're not going to do that. It's the unequivocal statement. It's the we're not going to, which gives the United States the right to immediately default terminate and get the cover costs, reprocure, and all its rights under the default clause.
Terrific. Thank you, Bob, so much. That kind of gives you an outline for the trifecta for contract inspection and acceptance. Make sure you think through your method of inspection acceptance, the delivery point or the inspection point, where are you going to be doing that, and when are you going to be doing it? How's the timing going to work in? And if you can approach your inspection and acceptance clause with all those factors in mind, you can hopefully get the right language in your contract and administer it in a way that's going to cause the least amount of problems for all parties involved. We have one more area that we'd like to talk about with regard to this, and that's the revocation of acceptance and the concept of latent defects. This is an area that has generated a lot of case law, and we're looking forward to talking to you about it next time on Between Two FARS.